Good morning and welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming out, so to speak, on this beautiful Saturday. My name's Myung Lee, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School and one of the coordinators of this conference. I'd like to point out Jane Asatuno, sitting in the front row here. Please stand. Jane is the other coordinator of the conference, and she's done just a tremendous amount of work. She's really the brains and most of the brawn behind the operation. Before we begin, Jane and I would like to thank a few people who have helped to make today possible, in addition to the sponsors that are recognized in your programs. For all of their cooperation and assistance, thank you to the Forum Office, the Institute of Politics, Associate Dean Joe McCarthy, Persis Whitehouse of the State and Local Executive Program, Jan Park, Adrienne Kaufman, Dunster House, the Office of the Dean of Students of Harvard College, Sodexo, and Kinko's. The Harvard Queer Student Leadership Network, affectionately called the Mothership, which is helping to coordinate the entire Queer Harvard Month calendar of activities. And our volunteers who have done everything from designing the program to picking our speakers from the airport to hawking t-shirts, which you'll see later today. Of course, we have to thank all of our speakers who are among the country's heaviest hitters in the campaign for gay rights, either through their lobbying and advocacy work or by being openly gay in highly visible public offices. Their participation really makes our conference title, our subtitle, an apt one. Today, our speakers will truly help us to define the course of the gay rights movement. I'd like to extend a special thanks to Martin Ornelas Quintero, who is a recent addition to our first panel. We're very lucky and grateful to have Martin with us today for a couple of reasons, which I'll describe. After most of the arrangements were in place for our conference, it was pointed out to Jane and me that communities of color were not represented on our panels, which we regrettably had somehow overlooked. And since we want the conference to speak to the entire GLBT community, we viewed this as a significant problem and one which we very much wanted to remedy as best we could under our time constraints. We got in touch with Martin and Diego, and he graciously accepted our invitation to participate. We also invited the National Black, Lesbian, and Gay Leadership Forum, but because of the short notice, they were unable to send a speaker. We're very delighted to have Martin with us today, and all I can say is we'll be in touch earlier next time. The last person I'd like to thank is the woman I'm about to introduce, our moderator for the rest of the day. Barbara Roberts first earned the attention of gays and lesbians across the country during her inauguration as Oregon's Lieutenant Governor and Secretary of State in 1984. On this occasion, she invited the Portland Gay Men's Chorus to perform in the Capitol Rotunda as part of the official ceremony. This was the first time that a gay or lesbian group had ever performed at a ceremony for a statewide elected official anywhere in the country. Clearly, this was a strong statement of support for gays and lesbians in Oregon and everywhere. Some thought at the time that this decision spelled doom for her term. A dozen years later, and a gubernatorial victory later, she and all of us can take pride in the political success she has achieved while consistently supporting gays and lesbians. While in office, Governor Roberts appointed 5 openly gay and lesbian judges, which is the most in Oregon history. She also appointed the most women and people of color to the bench in Oregon history. Governor Roberts' term also saw the introduction of Oregon's notorious anti-gay ballot measures, which she consistently fought and spoke out against. In response to these homophobic initiatives and to address issues of racial and religious discrimination, Governor Roberts established a summit on building a hate-free Oregon. Her actions and outspokenness helped see to it that ballot measure after ballot measure was defeated, and defeated by increasing margins. In 1994, the governor joined the board of the Human Rights Campaign. During her term, Governor Roberts, representing HRC, delivered speeches about gay rights all over the country, from California to DC, and from Detroit to New Orleans. Earlier this year, she became a member of HRC's executive committee and also a member of the public policy committee. After leaving office, she worked as a volunteer in an AIDS hospice called Our House until she moved east and joined the Kennedy School, where she now directs the executive program for senior managers in state and local government. Barbara Roberts made a decision early in her political career to speak out on issues she believed in, including rights of gays and lesbians. She has done us all, gay and straight, a tremendous service by demonstrating that not only can a heterosexual politician talk about these issues, but that she or he should. It has been a great pleasure for Jane and me to get to know her through our work on this conference, and it is my honor to introduce to you now Governor Barbara Roberts.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for that nice courtesy. I will note that it was begun by a state representative from the state of Oregon who's here for a later panel, and they take good care of me. Good morning. We're here today for what I think is a remarkable program that focuses, as you've heard, on defining the course of the gay rights movement in this country and probably internationally. This conference is the very first event of this scale held at Harvard University. And today you're going to hear from those who have been on the front lines of political and societal change for the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered citizens of this nation. You're going to hear from a dozen leaders on 3 panels who have been toiling in the vineyards for equality, fairness, dignity, and legal equity for all Americans. This is a program about civil rights and human dignity. And it is a program, and a program like this one today, that really are crucial in the efforts to bring this particular civil rights issue out of the closet. The work and the courage of the panelists you're going to hear from today have helped create some real victories in this country. We forget we've had victories because we note the losses so clearly. But I think it's important we remember that how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who have worked together with the leadership of some of the people we hear from today to give us some of the victories that have actually taken place. The Ryan White Care Act and its extension is clearly a victory in this country. Increased money for AIDS research, stopping the expulsion of military members with AIDS from service to their country, the appointment of gays and lesbians to many important national policy positions in a way that has never happened before, successfully stopping the passage of anti-gay ballot measures in Oregon and Maine and Idaho, helping keep anti-gay measures off the ballot in Nevada and Washington and other states, and a vote for the first ever pro-gay measure in the United States Senate, a measure that lost on a 49-50 vote. And if Senator Pryor of Arkansas had not needed to be with his son during a cancer surgery, we would have won that vote, because the vote would have been 50-50, and the vice president stood ready to cast the tie-breaking aye vote. Now, some believe that we lost that vote, and technically, I guess we did. But it was a huge win in demonstrating that a win on ANDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, is only around the corner, and it is going to happen. And here today in this room are the leaders in that 2-year battle to bring the bill to a Senate vote and demonstrate that that issue is an issue of fairness whose time has come, and the nation knows it. As Senator Kennedy said to HRC after the vote, we have not won every battle, but we have won many of them, and we are on the move, he said, and this is not the time to turn back. In-depth and broad-based polling in every part of this nation shows that we are moving this country on the issue of fairness and equity. In state after state, community after community, consciences stir and are awakened as Americans begin to understand the prejudice, intolerance, injustice, and pain that has been heaped upon the gay men and lesbians of this country. And no matter how intolerant or mean-spirited people like Jesse Helms and Trent Lott and Senator Byrd continue to be, and the way they continue to speak, they will not turn back the clock for long in this country. Too many Americans have now seen the faces and heard the voices of their fellow Americans who happen to be gay and lesbian. The issue is now about real people, and the polling done in this country reflects that very clear support for fairness and equity. An example, 77% of American voters say they think that gays and lesbians should have equal rights in the workplace. Now think about that, 77%, a 49-50 vote. It's coming. And as the percentage of Americans who now know they know someone who is gay or lesbian, I love that, know they know, it's up to 54%. But as that happens, homophobia decreases. Since the 1994 elections, American voters have clearly begun rejecting such discrimination. Anti-gay ballot measures, as I mentioned, in Oregon and Idaho and Maine were defeated. Senate hopefuls like Ollie North in Virginia, who campaigned on and was highly supported by anti-gay positions and people, was defeated by Senator Chuck Robb. And that kind of thing happened throughout the nation in 1994. I'm going back to 94 because we have a lot of good numbers, and I wanted to just give you a sense of the change. In 1994, of the 13 U.S. Senate co-sponsors of ENDA who were up for re-election, all 13 won re-election. In the House, 110 sponsors won re-election. And if you think about what that was, a conservative landslide in 1994, I think it's clear that this country is changing. Twice as many Americans fear the so-called right-wing agenda as the so-called gay agenda. Lesbian and gay Americans seek nothing more than a guarantee of the basic rights all Americans expect and deserve, rights that are still legally denied to gays and lesbians in most states in this nation. Lesbians and gay men simply seek an equal opportunity to have a good job, a decent home, and a loving family without living in fear of discrimination and violence. This is not an extremist agenda. This is a human agenda. And I support and work on this agenda nationally and am proud to do so. People sometimes wonder what motivates my active work and support on this basic civil rights issue. They look at me, I'm pretty straight and pretty heterosexual, and they can't quite figure out why I'm so committed to this issue. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to tell you a story that might help explain how my thought process works, though it's not all about thought. A few years ago, I was honored by the Oregon ACLU with their highest award that they give in my state. The award I received was one that I had watched presented to Oregonians that I considered role models and even heroes in my state for the record of commitment and personal strength in the area of civil liberties and human rights. I remember being astonished that I was receiving the award and very proud. But I also remember at the time trying to evaluate and understand how it was that I became a civil libertarian. I mean, I come from a blue-collar family, very small town. There's nothing about my background or education or anything else that should have put me in the position of feeling as I do about civil liberties. Well, I decided as I thought over this that it was possible to become a civil libertarian through pure intellectual reasoning. I also knew that it was possible to become a civil libertarian through instinctive emotional reaction. But my sense of civil rights and personal liberty says that becoming a civil libertarian is not possible unless your heart is involved. Sometimes the lessons of civil rights and human dignity are learned in moments of indignity and pain. Sometimes those lessons are learned in moments of love and warmth, through the experiences of others sometimes. The classrooms for equal rights and for fairness are literally all around us. Some of my learning came from growing up in a home surrounded by respect and love. I happened to have a father who believed that it was fine to have daughters and no sons. He believed that girls were real people, and I believe and grew up believing that women had worth. I received a different kind of educational credential in civil rights when my son, who is autistic, was refused a public education and sent home from school in the first grade, not for the day, but forever. I learned about a different kind of discrimination when I lost my adult status at age 34 because I was a newly divorced woman. My credit rights, my legal rights, many of them simply disappeared. They took away my fire insurance. I had to have someone sign for my telephone. It was like being an 18-year-old again, if not worse. I learned something important from my younger son, who in his junior high school years went to the principal's office frequently. One day the principal called and said, "Mark is back in my office." The principal said, "Mark, you cannot fight your handicapped brother's battles for him." And Mark looked the vice principal straight in the eye and said, "If this isn't being your brother's keeper, then I can't imagine what is." So I think we could learn a lot from children if we listened more carefully. My late husband, who was 20 years my senior, helped me to understand the era of Hitler, and Joe McCarthy. He shared it with a sense of a contemporary rather than from an historical perspective. I had read about it, he had lived it, and he helped me to understand what it meant when one used the terms constant vigilance. So many lessons, so many classrooms, and after a while, there were no distinctions for me. Civil rights, personal liberties, human dignity, equality, and freedom cannot be segregated, for they belong to everyone. But these lessons can't be learned. The broad understanding cannot be gained. It cannot happen in the closet, and that's what today is about. Susan B. Anthony, in her struggle for women's rights, made a very short but absolutely significant statement many, many years ago that I think might be appropriate for us to use as we think about today. Never another season of silence. It is a statement that has become my personal motto on matters of human rights and civil liberties. I am not disabled, and I'm not a racial minority. I have not experienced religious discrimination. I am not a lesbian. But for me to be silent just because I don't think that I am personally impacted is for me to accept hatred and discrimination, for me to condone bigotry and pain, for me to excuse indignity and fear-mongering. It is not a matter of courage, it is a matter of conscience. So many of us have stood up and spoken out for racial equality, women's rights, religious freedom, rights for those with disabilities, reproductive choice. The messages we carry now should be no different from any of those messages. For we must realize clearly that if any group of Americans face the loss of their civil rights, their dignity, their freedom to assemble, their job, or their housing, that many of us might be in the next group chosen by those who judge by self-appointment. We cannot afford to be silent, and that's part of what today is about. So let us begin. Thank you very much. You are about to hear from the in the trenches people. Truly, this is a group of 3 people who you are going to feel so excited and thrilled and grateful when they are through. First, I'm going to introduce Martin, who, as you heard earlier, received a very late invitation and is still here with us. He is a native of Tijuana, Mexico, and he currently serves on the as executive director of the National Latino, Lesbian, and Gay organization, YEGO. Prior to his current position, he served with them as the director of their AIDS program for 2 years, and under his leadership, Martin was instrumental in establishing a nationally coordinated effort to strengthen, build, and sustain the infrastructure and capacity of LGBT development for Latino organizations. In addition, he has been a principal architect in the creation and development of the National Network of Latino LGBT Organizations. There are now 87 affiliated organizations throughout the United States and Puerto Rico, and that is a remarkable accomplishment. Martin served as the National Coordinator of Research and Evaluation for the National Task Force on AIDS Prevention, and during his tenure with NTFAP, he served as the project manager of the groundbreaking KABB project of African American, Latino, and white men in southern states. He acted as a coordinator for the first national gathering of gay men of color. Since 1994, he has been a consultant to CDC on HIV prevention and the management team of the U.S. Conference of Mayors of Gay Men of Color Needs Assessment. He is active on the Hill, playing an important role there every day. He is active across the nation and has impacted this issue for the people he serves in a way that is unprecedented in this country. He has done work in a broad arena of areas, and it is my pleasure today to be able to introduce him and to tell you that he resides in Rockville, Maryland, with his husband of 7 years. Martin.
good. Good morning, buenos días. It is a privilege to be here, even though it was on a short notice. Anytime the opportunity arises, we need to rise to the challenge and take that opportunity. So, of course, without a doubt, I had to tell my husband, well, we're going to have to make different plans for maybe next Saturday and hope that he believes at this time that there will be a next Saturday. But what is Llegó? Llegó was founded in 1987, and it came out of the passion of individuals from around the country that started organizing in different communities across the U.S. and Puerto Rico. Not by coincidence, but during the March on Washington in 1987, that's proved to be a catalyst in all of our movements, as that was the creation of a number of organizations, including Llegó, the Black, Gay, and Lesbian Leadership Forum, and several other organizations that came out of that effort. Llegó is a constituency-based organization and is the largest LGBT Latino constituency-based organization in the country. We take our role in a broader movement in very concrete ways. We look at our responsibility as members of the movement and begin by fostering a sense of community, fostering a sense of belonging within our constituencies to begin feeding into the broadest sense of the term. For us, the definition of a movement, we define it by its parts. By defining its parts, you begin to define the whole. For us as Latinos, and I'll be focusing within a Latino context, which can apply to other ethnic or racial minorities or for other oppressed peoples. But for me, let me focus a little bit on some personal experience as a Latino gay man. Being bicultural, it's a term that means you are in two cultures. What that means for me is that there's several pieces to me that I always identify with. And I say that very carefully because there's no balancing of those two parts of me. There's not one that's heavier than the other one. I'm not gay Latino versus Latino gay. It sometimes just rolls off the top of my tongue which one comes first or the other one. But the important point is that there's two pieces at this point in this context. Those two pieces are not prioritized over each other. That can never happen. That would be, just what is my arm, right arm stronger than my left arm or better than my left arm? It's really I need both arms to be able to effectively function. I think that is one of the challenges that we constantly need to face within our broadest LGBT movement or queer movement, the differences that we all bring to these discussions. I lived in Atlanta for several years, and that was a very interesting experience for me. Having grown up in California as a Mexicano, moving to Atlanta from the different counterparts that I had met, always said, well, there's no Mexicans in Atlanta. There's no Latinos in Atlanta. Well, I'm pretty proud to say that every city that I've gone to in this country, I've seen Latinos. So we're everywhere. The thing is that in Atlanta, it was very different because of the way race dichotomy gets played out in a black and white context. It was amazing. I was in a room with several white gay men. There was 3 of them, and there was 3, myself, my husband, another man, another Latino. And we're sitting there talking to each other, and we're talking about race. And they're saying, well, you know what? There's no difference between us. And I'm getting frustrated, going, what do you mean? What do you mean there's no difference between us? And then I finally realized, visually, they saw no difference between us. Culturally was another question, but it was a visual representation of what it was that we were supposed to be, that we were not seeing. All it took for me is to go to the airport and see who's cleaning, go to the hotels, go to who cuts the vegetables that you eat, who makes sure that your bed is done, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're there. We're just not seen, which was really difficult for me, and I stayed there for 2 years and then left. But The point that I'm making is not necessarily the differences that we continuously focus as that's what the issue is. The issue really is the broad commonalities that we have. And that's what I want to focus some of my comments. In terms of the commonalities of a movement, let me first define it again for us. For us, as Diego, the movement is a social change movement for the liberation of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender peoples. That movement must be through a consciousness of race, class, and gender. Unless we acknowledge all the pieces within our movement, we feel that we will continue making errors without learning from those errors. In recognition of those errors, some of those errors will be quite painful, but we are confident they will serve as growing experiences. Let me use the example of the invitation that just happened yesterday. I was actually quite impressed with my discussion with Mi Young. When he called me, he was extremely apologetic. I'm sorry, the mistake happened, and this is what we want to do about it. What I told him is, you know what? Mi Young, you're an honorable man. You have done the right thing. You have recognized it, you have done something about it, and you have taken responsibility. There's no need for us to continue beating up ourselves over something that already happened if we want to stay there, whereas we really want to move from there. And so I told them, you know, it's okay. It's okay. It's not the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last time. But not that it makes me less angry. Of course it makes me angry. But am I going to stay there? No. That serves absolutely no purpose, because now I know, or I'm certainly hoping, that all 75, 150 people that are here, next time they're putting a panel together, they are going to go through the different filters of race, class, and gender, so that we are cognizant of it. And so it is a learning experience that we're moving from there. And again, Mi Young, I really, truly appreciate your honesty and the honor which you bring into this challenging situation. So thank you very much. I appreciate that. That in itself is not politically correct. There have been several discussions that I've seen in the press about people being tired about being politically correct and whatever that means. And so let me define political correctness in my terms. To me, the example I just used with Mi Young is not politically correct. Political correctness to me would have been, I'm sorry we didn't notice, and so next year we'll try. That's political correctness. I'm sorry, it was somebody else's mistake. You can go talk to them. Or let me hope that nobody notices, and let me have the panel go on. That's politically correctness. That type of indifference in quasi-attempts is really the political correctness that is damaging to all of us that are oppressed peoples or that are marginalized in one way or another. That's the difference of the political correctness, not doing the right thing and trying to get away with it as if no one's going to notice. And sometimes there will be people that won't notice, but most of the time, people notice. People absolutely notice. One of the other things about politically correctness that I've been in numerous discussions with press and how issues of people of color do not get onto the mainstream press and get the information, the messages out of all the wonderful work that everyone's doing. And when we bring the issue of race or class, they say, well, you know, we're not going to count the number of stories. That we're not going to say, you know, we need another brown story, we need another black story. And what I say is, you know what? The fact that you don't count, then let me count for you. And when we did count for them, we noticed that in a year's time, there were 5 articles written on Latinos in one of the largest Latino cities in a gay press. And so you do need to count. And you need to count because if you don't count, you're going to forget. That is not should be your quota. Absolutely. Everyone opposes quotas. I oppose quotas. But unless you have a line, a demarcation, a line to tell you this is the basic minimum, then it becomes problematic because then you'll tend to see that decisions of importance of issues don't get put out into the press. A situation in, well, I hope another press of Chicago is here, but if they are, oh well. They stopped sending press releases to the gay press in Chicago. So what for? You never cover them. You never think what we're doing is important. And so why would we keep sending you information every time what we do is not an important issue? And so that's where the differences in priorities and challenges that are faced within our movement in both localized politics, statewide, and national politics. What we saw at Diego in terms of a broader movement is that there are organizing efforts of LGBT people of color taking place around the country. They mentioned the Black, Gay, and Lesbian Leadership Forum. There's also an Asian and Pacific Islander project out of San Francisco that's beginning to connect the networks of API men and women around the country. There's also a Native American Leadership Work Group that's coming out of North Carolina, where Native American or two-spirited men and women are coming together and create those linkages for a broader national movement within movements. And so within those movements, it's clear for us that there cannot be one voice for our movement. It's really a series of movements coming together with a hope and an intention and a fostering and a massaging for a synergy of our movements coming together for our broader goal, and that's the liberation of our peoples within a social change context. We recognize at Diego the importance of the interdependentness of each other. Would it matter to me if I walk down the street back in Atlanta, if I'm walking on this, it happened numerous times, if I walk into a store and somebody's following me, do I think, are they following me because I look Mexican, or are they following because I look queer? I say, it doesn't really matter. I realize, you know what, it's because I'm a queer Mexican. That's why they're following me. And it's true. I mean, you know it. You know, in the same way, and I say, these are type of things that I say that people go, that you're just paranoid, you're just, well, you know what? No, I don't think so. Let me use an example as women. You know when men look at you the wrong way. You know. You have been raised to know when men look at you what that means, and you just go, you know it. Likewise with me in terms of race. I know when I walk into a room and people go, It's just you is something you know, something you feel. And so it doesn't matter to me which one it is. The fact that it's happening, discrimination is discrimination. There is no levels of discrimination. It's one word, discrimination. It could happen to anyone, and it doesn't really matter whether it's because I'm a dyke, whether it's because I'm Mexican, whether because I'm transgender. That does not really matter. The fact is that discrimination is the issue. I think in terms of a broader movement, and part of what we saw in the most recent elections, I'm presuming that Winnie will be talking more about it. There we go.
If you'd like.
Okay, thank you. I was going to talk a little bit about polling data, and I'm sure Winnie has those numbers much more readily available than I. But my point being that we as a broader community notice of our clout and of our power is very apparent, and it is very, very clear. Whether we have exerted our full power, we are coming into bloom into doing that. I think also as a Latino community, we are coming into bloom into this political context and in the U.S. and Puerto Rico and the work that's being done. We are coming to the table. It's a long process. However, our communities are at different stages in coming into that place of leadership. I think in terms of the linkages of what it is that our movements require is to connect, as was previously done by the governor, is there are numerous oppressive forces that are oppressing all of us. The same ones that are proposing the type of English-only initiatives are the same ones that are proposing the defense of marriage, are the same ones that are proposing removing the safety nets in the U.S. government are the same ones that are proposing to allow the radical right wing to take over certain parties to prevent us from controlling our own bodies and or controlling the types of needed medications that we can smoke or not smoke. And so you begin to see that those same forces are the ones that are the link. That's the enemy. And I think that's my message for us, as we do recognize the numerous challenges. The enemy are those oppressive forces that it's really not going to matter which one it is. If we focus on the perpetrator, as I'll call them, the perpetrator has begun to infiltrate many of our communities in weird ways, and that's probably an inaccurate term. But I think for us as Latinos, it's really important that we recognize that we have not left, quote, our Latino community and created communities in isolation. We are communities within our communities, and what those challenges may bring is a lot of time closetedness. That's right? Absolutely not. That is not correct. It's amazing how homophobia is so insidious sometimes that we don't even notice it anymore. But within a Latino context, it was interesting. Some of us were at a meeting with the vice president, and he had been fed the notion that Latinos were more homophobic. And I thought, well, who would tell him that? I thought, well, other Latinos. Right? Other Latinos, I want to separate that the problem with Latinos is the queer agenda, which just happened, I might add. There's a whole movement that we fought off of a sense that the problem with Latinos within an AIDS context is that a gay agenda had been shoved down their throats. Well, you know what? Yeah, we'll take credit for that gay agenda. And that gay agenda said that gay Latino men, 70% of all diagnosed cases were dying. And there were no resources. Not until 1989 was there a coordinated effort. And not until 93 did it result into secure funding. And so, yeah, that was a very clear gay agenda within a Latino context, that the retribution for that is now, let us silence a gay agenda. And what we're saying is, you know what? Nah, we cannot silence that. What we need to do is increase the anti-homophobia work that needs to take place within our communities and within a community organizing context. Because our communities are not anymore homophobic. It's just a level of effort that has not been invested into doing the type of education that needs to take place within our communities. The tools are not there. The tools are not there for them to cope with the differences in homophobia. Am I getting my cue? Oh, okay. It's where our communities are in their education process. And the challenge with that visibility, that you never know which whose mom may be watching what's coming out, what's actually electronically, so unless they're on the internet. Anyways, let's pretend it's C-SPAN. And so you never know who might be flipping through the channel and might hear something about gay, and might know about a cousin, might know about their daughter, might know about something, and say, well, let me listen to it. And if they see a whole panel and they begin to see color, they begin to say, well, wow, it is beginning to take place in my own community. It's not this others. That's the challenge of that invisibility of all of us as people of color, that when we don't see our faces, we begin to think we don't exist. And if we don't exist, then we become indifferent. And if we become indifferent, as soon as they take any one of us out, the rest of us may not notice. And so it is important to count, and it is important to notice the difference. For us as Latinos and Latino queers, we believe that our civil rights movement is being fought within a healthcare environment. And so oftentimes we haven't been invited to these types of panels because we don't do lobbying in DC like other organizations. The implication is that we're not doing anything within a civil rights, gay and lesbian context. And we differ unequivocally. We differ fundamentally that our movement, our civil rights movement, is being fought within an HIV and AIDS context and access to basic human health care. access to prevention services, access to community building, access to building the institutions that will respond to the needs of our communities at local levels. That is our response. And so instead of creating this movement and imposition of issues into our community, I would propose that instead we support the community where it's at, identify the issues, and recognize the path of that movement of where it's going forward. I propose that instead of changing ourselves to fit into society, that we change society that's oppressive to our needs. I believe that the issues that continue to surface will be some of the issues that are currently on the table, whether it be an issue of lesbians and gays in the military, whether it be an issue of marriage, whether it be an issue of child custody and adoption, or whether it be an issue of immigration. All the issues are about gays and lesbians. It's amazing if you would notice in some of the gay press that no matter what it is that the topic is happening in the rest of society, they'll find a gay angle to it. They will. They always will. Someone was joking as, yeah, there was 3,000 people were killed, and they'll find that 2 gay men were in there. And so that will be the issue. 2 gay men were killed in a 3,000, explosion. The same challenge needs to occur within a class consciousness, within a race consciousness, and within a gender consciousness. Because immigration is a gay issue, and it will continue to be so. In my 2 minutes, I believe, again, that our survival is linked to each other, and it's about community organizing, building, and supporting our institutions so that our basic rights of health, education, well-being, non-discrimination within a political context are achieved. I propose that we take the necessary steps to feed our minds, our souls, and our hunger for equality. I invite you to join Llegó. I invite you to our upcoming, the largest gathering of LGBT Latinos and Latinas taking place in San Juan, Puerto Rico, from the 9th through the 13th of this year. I will be around for the rest of the day. I'd love to have you on our mailing list. I'll be around, so I brought some information. Thank you for your time and your understanding.
You didn't say what month, the 19th, what month?
Thank you, and our conference is in October. I thought everyone would know October 9th through the 13th, so thank you.
The 19th to the 13th of this year, I thought maybe a little clarity, and I didn't want them to miss, because the opportunity to go to Puerto Rico is, this is a pretty special opportunity, so I didn't want you to miss that. Our next panelist, Winnie Stockelberg, is the legislative director of the Human Rights Campaign. Winnie has carried water in more ways than I can begin to tell you. HRC is the largest gay and lesbian organization in terms of membership in the world right now, with over 200,000 members. And Winnie, believe me, represents them on the Hill and in the White House as well, I might add. Her work on issues of HIV/AIDS and funding, on women's health, on securing equal rights and protecting the health and safety of all Americans has been remarkable. She was a major player during this last fall's vote, that 49-50 vote I mentioned. She's one of the people who really made a huge difference and will be a major player in the upcoming fight for the passage of ENDA in the 105th Congress. She is one of the best organized lobbyists, and I use the term with great respect. She speaks to your issues, your concerns, with the kind of credibility on the Hill that few people have. And it has been an absolute pleasure that I have had while I've been working with HRC to work with her, the team of people she's put together and that have been put together for HRC to carry the work and the message in Congress to the White House and across this country has been phenomenal, and Winnie has carried a major part of that message. Winnie.
Thank you, Governor Roberts. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jane and Young, for creating this incredible opportunity for us to speak to each other. I think that's what it's really about. This has also been an opportunity for me to meet and to see some friends whom I haven't seen for many years. It was an opportunity for my partner and I to see the Hail Bob Comet on our way up here, which was something that we hadn't gotten a chance to do, so I want to thank you for that as well. The Human Rights Campaign is the largest gay and lesbian political organization, and that's important not because we're big, and not because we have 200,000 members across the country, but because of the message that we're able to carry on Capitol Hill, and that the message we're able to convey to people who, like it or not, are making decisions on our behalf all of the time. We put a lot of stock in conveying messages, and in fact, one of the things that the Human Rights Campaign does really and is at the forefront of is political strategy. And political strategy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens after polling and research and data, and we are very data-driven as an organization. And I think that's very important as you hear people talk about statistics, about support for AIDS funding, support for job discrimination protections, support for including sexual orientation into hate crimes protection. As you hear a number of the issues that we'll talk about during the day, it's important that there's a foundation for that. And that's one of the strengths, I believe, of the Human Rights Campaign, is the polling that we do. We take a very strategic look at it. We use pollsters that are both Democrats and Republicans so that we get a bipartisan message that we can then convey on Capitol Hill. As the governor mentioned, we have a membership of over 200,000 members, and we were building that membership. But it is painstaking work. And I think what's important to remember is when you put this all in perspective, the Christian Coalition, for example, has a membership of close to 2 million members, 1.9 million members across this country. HRC, as just one gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered organization, has 200,000 members. And I think just sort of as you picture what that scale looks like and where the weight of that is, it's fairly challenging, and in fact, it's fairly frightening. As I send my lobbyists up to Capitol Hill to talk about the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, to talk about hate crimes protections for gays and lesbians, to talk about AIDS funding for communities of color and for women, 1.9 million, 200,000. I mention that because the whole point of where our movement, and I really mean collectively our movement, is headed, is that we need to all get involved. And it excites me that we have a forum like today, but this can't be the end of our dialogue. This has to be a beginning, and only one piece of a beginning. We not only need to reach out to gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgendered community members, but we need to reach out, and it's why I'm delighted that Governor Roberts is here, we need to reach out to our fair-minded and straight allies as well. Almost more importantly than the Human Rights Campaign bringing in more gay and lesbian members is the Human Rights Campaign's challenge and all of our challenges to bring in our fair-minded allies, because we can only get things done as we carry a message to Capitol Hill that conveys the breadth of us as human beings. And I think Martine spoke about that. We are all human beings with lots of different pieces of each other represented in us. And we need a membership base at the Human Rights Campaign and across this country that conveys that diversity that we all represent. The Human Rights Campaign began in the early 1980s as a fund, as a political action committee, to elect fair-minded members to Congress. Several people got together in Washington and looked around and said, boy, they're passing laws that are affecting our lives, that are discriminatory. We have the beginnings of a disease, AIDS, and we can't seem to get any attention in the government for that, for funding, for research. So let's not yell and scream. Let's just work on electing fair-minded people to Congress. And so we began as a fund, as a political action committee, and we still retain one of the most powerful and largest political action committees, PACs, in this country. Our PAC just last cycle, in the 96 election cycle, gave over $1 million to fair-minded candidates across this country. And for the first time, we were involved in a state election work in California, where we helped turn the California Assembly from an anti-gay majority to a fair-minded majority, which, as California goes, so goes much of the country. As a New Yorker, it pains me to say that, but I think it's very clear that California's import in how national politics shakes down is very clear. And so to have the California Assembly back in the fair-minded hands of the constituents of this country and of that state is very important. So we are very proud of the efforts of our political action work in the state of California, as well as across the country. We were involved in over 180 races, congressional races and senatorial races in the country in the 1996 elections. And when you talk about the differences between the 94 elections and the 1996 elections, the contrasts couldn't be more clear. The differences couldn't be more stark. I mean, we had an incredible 1996 election campaign. From the Human Rights Campaign's perspective, we were successful in over 80% of the races that we were involved in. We sent staff to races, we gave money, we organized our volunteers in states and communities and districts all across this country to get involved, to turn out for those fair-minded members of Congress as they were running. And in fact, we are feeling on Capitol Hill, where those results then get translated to, we are feeling the success of those efforts. And so that is something that's been wonderful to see sort of come to fruition through those elections. The other piece that's very important to our movement collectively is what happens not in Washington, D.C., where much of the lobbying takes place on Capitol Hill, but what happens in communities like this, what happens across the country. And we are very pleased to have just hired Donna Redwing, who comes from the great state of Oregon, which is well represented here today. We are very pleased to have Donna Redwing heading up our National Field project, which is not only out there to organize the existing members, but to grow that membership into a vehicle and into a force that can combat the Christian Coalition and the Family Research Council and Concerned Women of America, and can in fact combat the attacks that we will continue to receive from the far right, from political, religious extremists in particular, but from a number of other organizations and individuals as well. And I think one of the results, one of the implications of the success that we have all had, and the fact that we can have discussions like this in public, and that we can have on television the end of this month an episode being watched by 40 million Americans on Ellen, where the lead character is going to come out as a lesbian. And the fact that all of this is becoming more visible, I think, opens us up to different kinds of attacks. And those kinds of attacks we all need to, with our straight allies, with the diversity that's represented here, we all need to get together and find ways to counter, because we will face new challenges as we become more visible and as we come out. The last piece of the Human Rights Campaign that I want to talk about in terms of the programs that we offer is the National Coming Out Project, which, as many of you may know, is the sort of Keith Haring drawing that on October 11th represents National Coming Out Day. But it's really a year-long effort to get people involved, to have national spokespeople like Candace Gingrich and Amanda Bierce and others to actually come out and talk about their sexual orientation. And it's about our getting involved and coming out, where we become stronger, where we become a force, not only on Capitol Hill, but in communities around this country. As I said, I think our movement is at a point now where we're facing new challenges as right-wing groups will continue to find ways to vilify our community as we come out at school, as we come out at work. And one of our strongest legs to stand on, one of the efforts that is going to win us attention and respect is job discrimination. It is a winning issue for us. It's an issue that our polling not only shows that we succeed, that we have great support across this country based on just the concept of protecting gays and lesbians from job discrimination, but in fact, when you get really specific, when you talk about a piece of legislation on Capitol Hill, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, similarly, there's great support for that as well. And I think we need to lead with those kinds of issues where we have such support. And it's why I am pleased to see corporations taking the lead on this issue. It's no longer that Congress is considering a bill, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but in fact corporate America is out front on this issue. IBM, for example, has just instituted domestic partner benefits for its employees. Over half of the Fortune 500 companies have non-discrimination policies because they recognize, I'd love to think that they're doing it because it's the right thing to do, but I think they don't necessarily think that, and in fact that they recognize that they need to retain their good, skilled employees, and it doesn't make business sense not to protect them, not to offer job protections and so on. So we're very optimistic about the prospects for the employment non-discrimination in this Congress. As others have mentioned, a slim defeat, 49 to 50, but who knows where we will take that in the next 2 years. I think that the bill has a solid chance of passing in this Congress, and I think that the work of all our communities pulling together is what brings us to the brink that we're on now. One of the important pieces to remember about the vote on job discrimination in the 104th Congress was, one, no one thought we would ever get there, and two, when you stood outside of the Senate chamber during that vote, the gay and lesbian community was joined by pillars of the civil rights community. And it's that kind of partnership when we see Dorothy Height and Wade Henderson and Ralph Neese, when we see pillars of the labor community and John Sweeney and the women's community standing shoulder to shoulder with the gay and lesbian community, that I feel that we're in a solid place where we can start looking forward and actually getting things done. There are a number of other issues, legislative issues that are paramount to our community, from HIV and AIDS to lesbian health to hate crimes to marriage to family issues and custody and children's issues that we also need to continue to talk about and bring to our attention. But it is only through your involvement and your ability to reach out to your allies and your friends and talk about these kinds of issues, whether you're gay or whether you're straight, that we're going to move forward on our long journey toward equal rights. Thank you.
I just realized from one of Winnie's comments that she really is sort of surrounded by people who are a little bit more Westerners, and she's probably feeling a little paranoid about that. But you know, sorry about that, Winnie. I didn't want to mention that, but you know, I taught her to say Oregon correctly, so you know that's the turning point. The final member of this panel is Kerry Lobel, who is the Executive Director of the National Lesbian and Gay Task Force. Kerry is the former lead organizer of the Women's Project in Little Rock, Arkansas. Prior to moving to Arkansas, Kerry served as the executive director of the Southern California Coalition on Battered Women for 5 years. She was the founding chair of the Commission on the Status of Women in Santa Monica, that's west too, and the chair of the Ocean Park Community Organization. She has written and edited extensively in some very important categories, including violence against women, speaking out about lesbian battering, lesbian teens in abusive relationships, dating violence, young women in danger, and was the co-author of the HIV, AIDS, and Reproductive Health, a Peer Trainer's Manual. So on both coasts, she has made a remarkable contribution to the cause. Kerry?
It's true that I'm a bi-coastal kind of girl, and in fact, though, I take my greatest pride in the work that I did for 10 years living in Little Rock, Arkansas, where many people say, well, why would you want to live there? What's happening off the coast anyway? And I'm here to tell you that the center of gravity has shifted to small towns across America. And in fact, when we look at what's happening in the country today, while the work that all of us are doing in Washington, D.C. is critically important, it's not where the major work and the major activism of our country is coming from. And I think all of us are delighted that that center of gravity has shifted. But at the same time, it requires constant vigilance in every state and in Washington, D.C., in every village, in every town, and in every city. So if we all sit up here and we look kind of exhausted, it's because we all have an exhausting but exhilarating job to do. I was talking with my mother last night, and I think my mother's like many people who have lesbian daughters. She was thrilled that I was coming to Harvard. That's a Jewish mother's dream. And, but she said, you know, I have to tell you, I feel a little bit mixed. You have all these great travel opportunities. You got to go to Yale, now you're at Harvard. But you have to be such a lesbian. Because, you know, being the executive director of a national gay and lesbian organization, people know that you're one. And so here's my mom having this big dyke traveling around the country, talking about our family and how I got to be how I am. But the reality is that the reason that our society has changed, and we've seen the tremendous cultural shifts that Winnie was talking about and that Martine has been talking about, is because people like me and Winnie and Martine and people like many of you have taken risks to come out with your family and friends and colleagues, and that has changed the face of our society as we know it. But as we've come out, we know that we have sort of what seems to be the best kept secret in the world, which is people ask me as I go around the country, particularly my colleagues from the Traditional Values Coalition and the Family Research Council, they ask me over and over again, Kerry, what is the homosexual agenda? And they're quite serious about this whole agenda thing. You know, they've raised millions and millions of dollars on the backs of this secret agenda that each of us carries with us. It's like a little secret pin that we keep in our pocket, or the card-carrying homosexual agenda card. And so I'm here to tell you for live TV about the agenda, and it's really kind of simple. It's one word: equality. Nothing more, nothing less. And we can joke about it, but for 25 years, the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force has tried to bring that very agenda to towns and cities across this country. The notion that we seek equality, period, nothing more, nothing less. And we seek a society where people can bring their full selves to America's table. I bring a fairly complicated full self to the table, as do many of you. I'm a woman, I'm a Jew, I'm a working class lesbian. I was raised in the San Fernando Valley. I spent 10 years in Arkansas, now I live in Washington, D.C. That's a full plate for me, and many of you carry many of your full selves to the table as well. And we realize at the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force that for me to bring myself to the table, or for you to bring your full selves to the table, regardless of who you are, it means that America as we know it must fundamentally transform itself. That not all of us can sit up to the table as it currently exists and have that table and have our country stay the same. To live in a country where there is equality for each of us will change our country as we know it, and we think that is a good thing because we think that fairness is essential for everyone. I want to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about some of the linchpin issues that the task force is working on and some of our work. As I've said, we're the oldest national gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered civil rights organization in the country. We'll be 25 years old next year. And to date the organization a bit, when we first came to being, one of the first major projects of NGLTF was to repeal the American Psychiatric Association's classification of homosexuality as a mental illness. Now, some of us around the country are still reeling from that label. And just because the American Psychiatric Association doesn't think that homos are sick anymore doesn't mean that other people aren't making big bucks saying that we're sick. But in fact, we've come a long way as society has had to change to accept us and the kinds of changes that we've brought to the fore. There are two linchpin issues that I think define where as communities we're going today. The first is marriage, and the second is sodomy. And when we talk about the successes of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act in the 104th Congress, we can never forget that at the same time that ENDA was being considered, the Defense of Marriage Act was also being considered by Congress, quickly passed both houses, and was signed by the President. This was brought into being because two groups, Concerned Women for America and the Traditional Values Coalition, waged a campaign to introduce boilerplate anti-same-gender marriage bills in every state across America. And if you look at these marriage bans that have been introduced in nearly every state, passed in 19 of those states, they're identical. If you look at the hearings that have been held on these bills around the country, many of the witnesses provided by the extremist right are identical, and they're some of the most notorious homophobes that our country has ever seen, like Paul Cameron, who believes in quarantining homosexuals. And so what the right has done is provide us with a tremendous opportunity to discuss our families, to discuss the passion with which we have relationships with each other, and also to discuss the right and the responsibility that goes with marriage, and also our right to have the freedom to marry. Well, that's been sometimes a difficult issue for our own communities. Perhaps some people wouldn't have chosen the marriage fight. In fact, many of us would have chosen the marriage fight, because so much of the stereotyping and mythologizing about the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender communities are that we can't hold still, that we can't have a stable relationship, that we're somehow different than other people who seek intimate relationships with other people. And what the marriage debate allows us to do is reconfigure the discussion of marriage on our own terms. It enables us to break through some myths and stereotypes. It enables us family by family, person by person, to talk about our relationships and why they are important to us. It also goes hand in hand with the choices that many of us have made to have children or to adopt children or to maintain custody of children that we've had in other relationships. Many of us feel that without marriage, we'll never be able to cross every T and dot every I and get all of our legal paperwork together to protect the children that we have in our families, to maintain that they are able to stay in secure, loving homes. And so this has become not only a rallying cry for the right, which has used the marriage issue to demonize us and vilify us, but it's become an important opportunity for activists around the country who've never been involved in other issues before to come and to discuss this one. In this year alone, there have been 200 bills introduced in state legislatures that affect the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered communities. 95 of those bills have been anti-gay bills, but 54 of those bills have been bills that would ban same-gender marriage. It's critical that we stop states from enacting same-gender marriage bans, because when the Hawaii court legalizes marriage, which it will this year, we want to be able to have people be able to marry and to be able to challenge laws like the Defense of Marriage Act and prove once and for all they're unconstitutional. The second linchpin issue that many of us have been working on for all too many years are bills related to sodomy and sodomy repeal. For someone who lived in a southern state, I know about the effects of sodomy all too well, and for those of you that live in Massachusetts, you live in a sodomy state as well. What sodomy laws do is that they cast a pallor over the kinds of sexual relationships that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people are allowed to have. And in some states, what we're finding is that the battle to institutionalize even worse sodomy laws is happening right as we speak. Just this week in Kansas, a bill was introduced and defeated which would have required people convicted of sodomy to register as lifetime sexual offenders. In the state of California, people that were convicted of sodomy or other sexual kinds of felonies in the 1950s, just this week received letters from the Los Angeles Police Department asking them to come register as sexual offenders with the Los Angeles Police Department, because California has something known as Megan's Law, which requires so-called sexual offenders to register with their communities. And so if we think that sodomy laws don't affect us, they do in those kinds of concrete ways. But they also affect us because when we go to seek custody of our children, in many states a judge can deny custody because we live in a sodomy state. Or if we try to do same-gender HIV and AIDS education in a sodomy state, it's not permitted because it's considered to promote sodomy. If we're able to win the same-gender marriage ban, and I believe we will, and I believe we will soon, and when we're able to defeat sodomy laws in every state, which I believe we will, and we will soon, I think we'll be talking about a very different playing field. There are other issues that are of concern to us as well, issues related to schools, youth, and safety. Just this week in Fairfax, Virginia, 2,600 people stood by on a football field, including teachers, when a young man kissed another young man on a dare, and one of those young men was beat up. No one stood by to intervene. It shows us that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There's civil rights bills being introduced in every state across the country. This is the year where there have been the largest number of pro-gay bills introduced. Many of them are on employment discrimination. Some would ban discrimination in credit and housing. Others would include sexual orientation and a long list of hate crimes. And there are many bills that affect us that have to do with HIV and AIDS that require people with HIV and AIDS to have mandatory testing, mandatory registration, and certainly bills that require the states to take a very punitive view of people with HIV and AIDS. Until we're able to work at a state level and a national level to ban to drop the ban on needle exchange, we'll see the rate of HIV being increased. There are many issues, as Martine said and Winnie said, that are linkage issues for our community, and they must be addressed, because if we're going to bring our full selves to the table, we have to address them. We see over and over in this country, in 7 communities so far this year, bills that would ban affirmative action programs. Those are critical programs for not just the queer community, but for our allies as well. There are punitive bills that have been introduced at the federal level and at the local level and state level around welfare and so-called welfare reform that affect the lives of people with children, affect the lives of people with HIV and AIDS. And there are terrible bills that have been introduced regarding immigration, which also affect our communities. I want to close by saying this, and it's something that my other colleagues have mentioned as well. We need each of you to support the work not only of our national organizations, which you are welcome to do, and are encouraged to do. But also we need each of you to take a real role in involving yourselves in your state and your local communities. This is where the battles will be won. This is where the battles for our future are going to be waged. And each of you has to be on the front line of that battle. I welcome each of you to join the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. I welcome each of you to join us at our annual Creating Change Conference in San Diego in November, which is the largest gathering of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered allies and our friends. About 2,400 people are expected to attend. And I encourage each of you, I challenge each of you to carry the homosexual agenda forward in your personal lives, in your public lives, because none of us can stop until all of us have equality. Thank you.
I think it's clear why these 3 spokespersons make such a difference for the cause in so many places, both in Washington, D.C. and around the nation. They are articulate, committed, and very clear about the agenda. We have about 15 minutes before lunch that we would like to give you an opportunity to ask questions of our 3 panelists. There are mics on both the side aisles, and I will call on you. Would you please identify yourself if you're comfortable doing that, and then ask your question. I'll go to the mic on my left, your right.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Dolbeck. I'm a first-year student here at the Kennedy School. I had a question about INDA. Specifically, a lot of people have said that having the vote on DOMA and INDA on the same day sort of allowed senators to position themselves as being not anti-gay by voting for INDA at the same time while they voted for DOMA, and that this created a sort of a unique situation in the Senate. Obviously, you don't think that's right, and I don't either, but part of it also had to do with, I think it's called the Work Fairness Act or something. It's a new bill that was introduced by a Republican senator, I think, or maybe it's a House member, I'm not sure. But I was wondering how you think that's going to impact the possible passage of INDA this year, and whether you think having DOMA on the same day as INDA last year created some sort of unique opportunity that it may be a while before we can actually replicate.
Okay. Working hard to turn this on while you were talking and was very unsuccessful. Oh, well, there you go. Promise I'm better on Capitol Hill than I am with an electronic device. It's an interesting point that you raised. To what extent did DOMA serve as a positive drag, as a draft for the employment
Excuse the term drag, please. Too easy.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. I don't see it that way. I see that the more opportunities that we have in public forums such as these, in Capitol Hill, in state houses across the country, in city councils, to discuss issues of discrimination, marriage, workplace discrimination, HIV and AIDS discrimination, the more successful we will be. And in fact, while this all took place as a political strategy to have the vote on ENDA be offered as an amendment to the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, I think that people saw, members of the Senate saw, that employment discrimination was an issue that they could vote the right way on and then be successful in their upcoming campaigns. And then the governor mentioned the fact that all of the senators who sought re-election in 1996 and who voted for the Employment Non-Discrimination Act were re-elected. I also think it's important to note that on the vote on the Defense of Marriage Act, similarly, all of the members who voted against the Defense of Marriage Act similarly were reelected. And again, while that issue was an attempt to be a wedge issue, the same-gender marriage and the Defense of Marriage Act, in fact, that's not what happened. Just as a quick comment, the bill that you referenced, the Workplace Fairness Act, which was introduced in last Congress and reintroduced by Congressman Brian Bilbray from San Diego, is a piece of legislation that, and I think others on later panels, and possibly Hy Feldblum may discuss this, take a look at employment protections in 180 degrees differently from where they now exist. And I think from the business community and the civil rights community, there are real problems with that piece of legislation.
I would just add to that I think that one of the things that the same-gender marriage ban bills has done has been to really activate people around the country who may not have paid attention before, because family issues, I think, have really created a passion in many of us that was not there before. And what that's done is it's created tremendous opportunities to move forward now pro-gay legislation that we did not have before, because there are more people who are tuned in, there are more people who are activated, there are more people who want to be involved. And so the constituencies that each of us had over this last year is really increasing because people are more tuned in. And I think we have the Defense of Marriage Act and these same-gender marriage bans to thank for that.
Good morning. My name is Ken Reeves. I'm a city councilor here in the city of Cambridge and former mayor of the city. And I'd like to welcome those of you who are not from here to today's conference. I have a dubious distinction of having asked the difficult question of where are the people of color on these panels. And I wanted to say that it just became unbearable to sort of experience the silence of oneself. And I would join Susan B. Anthony that no longer in silence. And I am glad that some rectification was possible. The question I have really has to do with the possibility of having a national queer politics conference talking about going into the future and not having everyone at the table, particularly in 1997. As you may or may not know, most of the new cases of HIV in the country are persons of color, black and Latino people. And if you read our own Boston Globe headlines, you'll find that AIDS has been all but cured, and that with protease inhibitors, we can all go on to do something else. Being a member of a community where that is not the case, and being both black and gay, one is concerned about the direction of national gay and lesbian movements in this moment, given the importance of the fact that all of us are not the same or not experiencing the same thing the same way. ENDA even, it is wonderful to end employment discrimination. Those of us who have been the tremendous beneficiaries of affirmative action know it is good to have something on the books. However, we also know it is not the answer or the be-all and end-all. And I would end this. Martine, I'm going to love you for the rest of my life because you have been able to do with grace what I perhaps have not able to do. But I'm wondering if you all know that within a short period of the next millennium, most of the people in this country are going to be like Martine. So therefore, it's essential that Martine's voice be here. Otherwise, we have lost our way and cannot be together. So welcome. The question, the nub of it is, as we go forward as a political movement, the people who are not experiencing the same thing the same way, how do our combined movements best keep everybody's issues on the agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Comments?
Thanks, Ken, for raising that point. I think that the only way that we bring everyone's full self to the table, as I call it, is to create situations where everyone's full self does come to the table. And I think in Washington, for example, we as national groups have been much more intentional about trying to meet with each other on a regular basis, which in the past did not happen. I think that many of our organizations are being very intentional about making coalitions across race and cross class and cross gender, and working on a variety of issues that are important to moving us all forward together. I don't know that 5 or 10 years ago we would have seen the kinds of cooperation among and between civil rights organizations that we see today, not only in Washington, but in nearly every state. And I find that to be very encouraging. But we have a long way to go, I think, in each of our organizations. But I think that we've made some small progress at the national level. I think ENDA was a good example. And I think in many of the states where we've seen people working together around issues, particularly like hate crimes and school issues, where we look for safety for all of our children, that those have provided tremendous places for us to come together as communities and to really talk in an authentic way about our lives, issues where before I don't think we ever did, or that we ever could.
I think, thank you. I don't know you, but I too will love you for the rest of my life.
This looks like a match made in heaven.
Until when your husband.
Yeah, until my husband hears about it.
Surprise.
But I think that it will continuously be a challenge to bring all the pieces to our agendas. But I think it's a joint responsibility. Both our own organizations, both individual responsibility to support our organizations to become players. And I mean that not only emotionally, psychologically, but financially. We need to ensure that as we take that responsibility, we're sharing the good times and the bad times that come with that, and the difficultness that comes with that. One example that I know Diego is very clear to bringing to awareness is the issue of language. I am forcing people to call me by my name. I refuse to accept anything less than my name. That's creating some level of awareness that, you know what, there is going to come a time very soon of additional English-only legislative initiatives that are the same, that are putting these defensive marriages around the country. It's the same people. It's, the Devil's Council, the Evil Women of America. It's the same. It's coming out of the same cave. And so bringing that forth is making those connections that, you know what, we do need to make those type of statements that HRC survival is linked to NGLTF's, Diego's, the Leadership Forum survival, and Living Well survival, and vice versa. We do need to make those statements, and we do need to role model as leaders the behavior that we want. And so it will be constant, constantly challenging us.
I just want to say one thing, and your comment about the AIDS epidemic, I think just sort of bears a comment here. In February, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported the first drop in AIDS deaths, which was touted as the greatest news. And that, in conjunction with protease inhibitors and the research that's going on, puts, for some people, their fears to rest and makes everyone else, move on to the next issue. The problem, exactly as you mentioned, is that in certain populations, people of color, in particular, the death rate decline was not as substantial, not 12%, but 3%. And in fact, in women, in heterosexual transmission. There was no drop at all, but in fact a 3% increase. And I think it's important for the gay organizations who were at least on the front lines in the response to the epidemic to continue, and certainly the Human Rights Campaign and a number of the other organizations represented here and not here need to continue to represent the diversity that the epidemic represents as well, and so that we as a gay organization would certainly never abandon our fight in the fight against AIDS as the demographics of the disease change.
Why don't we take 10 more minutes to finish question and answer? So can we keep the questions succinct and hopefully the answers as well and still get an exchange here? Over there.
This microphone's a little high. My name is Glenn Grossman. I'm a graduate student at Tufts University. I'll try to keep this succinct, but I want to give a little background before I ask the question. Very succinct. I think that universities are really an untapped resource that the TLGB organizations have really not honed in on. I think if you look, there's a lot of activity among students at universities and LGBT organizations. And there's a lot of social activity, a lot of political activity, but there's very little intercollegiate activity. There's no real campaign that multiple universities can cling on to and drive forward. I think universities have a huge history, going from Vietnam War to apartheid, environmental activism, of really bringing issues up to the light and really making strong differences in national campaigns. I was wondering I think additional resources that makes universities especially appropriate and ripe for change are PFLAG I think is a sleeping giant. All of us, or most of us, are alumni to universities or to some sort of educational system, and we all have some involvement in it. And we have a lot of.
Can I get you to do your question,
I'm sorry.
please?
My question to each of you is: what campaign can you recommend that we take on? We have all the resources. We just need a campaign to get us going and connect all of us. The campaign has to be something that has a definitive action that the university can take. Something that I haven't seen yet.
For many years, the task force has worked with a variety of campus organizations and, in fact, published a campus organizing manual. I mean, I would say to you, and I don't mean to be flip, it's really a pick-one situation, whether it's trying to support the formation of a GLBT center on campus, whether it's to promote anti-discrimination language in the schools, charter. There are a number of things, any of which I think would be good, and any of which the organizations at this table would be happy to support. There is a network of GLBT campus centers that meets twice a year and communicates through email. I'm in a number of fine organizations, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you after.
I think the other thing that I would add is that the campaign be based on some level of permanency because of the nature of college campuses. You're here from 4 to 6, 7, some 10 or longer years, depending on what plan you're on. But really make it some level of permanency for those that may be coming after you. Because I was part of numerous efforts at Berkeley, and you start finding out that, hey, what we went through in X year had already happened, 10 years ago. But people weren't aware. So I would say that it be focused on permanency.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jamie Smart, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual Student Caucus here at the Kennedy School. Once again, I apologize because I have sort of a setup question as well. And this question is actually directed to Ms. Lobel because she spoke a little about what I'm about to ask about. I want to read briefly from an article that Michael Bronski wrote in the Boston Phoenix last June about the Amendment 2 decision and the meaning of it for the gay and lesbian community. He begins, heterosexuals are uncomfortable with the idea of gay and lesbian sex. In the early days of the gay liberation movement, this was something that gay people publicized all the time. In fact, banners at early gay pride demonstrations, before they became known as gay pride parades, read, "Gay sex is gay power." Then the gay rights movement made a change. They felt they could make greater gains by promoting the idea of equal protection for homosexuals in the classic civil rights argument. By describing homosexuals as a class of people who are denied equal protection under the law, the gay rights movement made a convincing case that persuaded heterosexuals without threatening them. It appealed to their best instincts, and it didn't get into all that messy stuff about, well, gay sex. By separating homosexual identity and homosexual activity, what the lawyers call status versus behavior, the gay rights movement made the case that gay people were just like straight people. At heart, that is a lie. I'm from Gastonia, North Carolina, and I'd be persuaded to argue that since people in my hometown, let me tell you a little bit about my hometown. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. But my question is simply, can you respond to this argument that the gay rights movement really isn't going anywhere as long as it's thinking about promoting gay rights in terms of equal access to resources instead of sort of full acceptance into what it means to be gay as a gay man or a lesbian?
You very succinctly put what I think is the heart of the tensions in our movements right now, which is the tension between those of us that would like to assimilate into heterosexual society and the we're like everyone else argument, and those of us who feel like we don't want to be like everyone else. And it manifests itself in many ways, whether it's the fear or trying to cast out bisexuals and transgendered people from our communities because we believe that that's not nice because we want to be like everyone else, to a number of different issues. I believe that we will only win because there will be people who will fight every aspect of that question. I believe that our organization represents probably one piece of that discussion, and HRC another piece, and the many groups that you'll hear today, and I think that's important. I'm not sure that there's just one strategy that all of us will feel comfortable with, and I think that all the strategies are ones that are essential to our victory.
Thank you, Governor Roberts. My name is Sue Hyde. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I want to welcome you all to Cambridge, a city that became one of a handful in the country that bans discrimination on the basis of gender expression. I'm going to turn my mic time, though, over to my friend and colleague, Yvonne Cook-Riley, who is no doubt going to raise the issue that was on my mind. Take it, Yvonne.
Good. Thank you, Sue. I'm Yvonne Cook-Riley. I am a director with the International Foundation for Gender Education. In other words, I am a transgendered person, in case you ever want to know what one really looked like. I'm also part of the Two-Spirit group out of North Carolina, being Cherokee. My problem is basically with HRC and coming back to our war cry of saying inclusiveness linkage. What are you doing today?
I think that my comments earlier about inclusiveness have to do with all of us working together toward not only common solutions, but identifying individual problems and then coming up with solutions for them. I think we are an organization that has, in early years, made some mistakes in not being as inclusive of the bisexual and transgender communities, but also not being inclusive of other communities as well, in particular, communities of color. And I think that we are making small but very significant steps in reaching out to diverse communities, the transgender community being one, and a very important one. I point to our work on hate crimes, to our work on employment protections, and coming up with transgendered legal activists and lobbyists, not only in Washington, but across this country, to come up with the way that we solve our mutual problem of job protections. And I don't know whether there's a specific piece of legislation where that ought to be done, or whether we need to sit down and have a dialogue about whether that piece of legislation is the Employment Non-Discrimination Act or a gender identity discussion. But I know that we are having those dialogues. I welcome that. I would be the first, though, to recognize that we haven't done enough. But I welcome your comments and sitting down and talking to you about how we can affect a better dialogue and move forward.
Thank you for recognizing the fact that we have some work to do.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take one more question, brief response. Absolutely one. This is it. Okay, a challenge. Brief.
Okay, I'm not a college student. I'm a 16-year-old high school junior from Medford, Massachusetts. And my question was, I'm a member of the Mass GLBT Youth Board, and we have a feeling among me and my other peers that we're kind of ostracized from the national activist movement. And considering my age, I do consider myself kind of an activist. And I was just wondering your position on what do you think today youth activism is, and do you think it'll play a more important role in the future?
I certainly hope it will. And I'm pleased that you're here. I am also pleased that there are other undergraduate students who are here and other young people who are represented here. I think that it's terribly important that not only our national organizations, but our communities generally speak to the diversity of our community, and that is all ages. We certainly face a problem, though, because our detractors would have it that the more we speak to youth, the more we're out recruiting youth to our agenda that Kerry so eloquently spoke about. And that could be nothing farther from the truth in terms of where we as individuals and representatives of these organizations need to be. But we have to continue finding ways to garner your strength and energy and make you relevant to our messages as well.
I think in my 2 seconds, if I can add, that it is a sense of recruitment for those young, questioning young people of their orientation. So it is, I don't want to move away from recruiting because it is recruiting. I do want to talk to that 14-year-old woman or young girl in Los Angeles who's considering suicide. And so, yeah, I do want to recruit her to know, you know what, it's okay to be a lesbian. There's no problem with that. So we do want to recruit. I think where I see our youth activists is I want change and I want it now. And that becomes a challenge because it keeps putting fire on our feet about needing to make change more rapid. I think our inner selves, our personal sides, may be easier to change from night to day, whereas bureaucratic systems, it's much harder to change. And it becomes this negotiating that, you know what, we can't do this until now, and it appears that we're putting off, as opposed to handling the issue that's immediate response. So I think it's a maturing of our entire dialogue that needs to incorporate both short-term immediate responses as well as well-thought-out strategic, medium, and long-term advances.
I would answer just a little bit differently. Sorry, Barbara. And that is to say that I think in many ways our national organizations are running to keep up with GLBT youth organizers. That it is GLBT youth that are raising bi and trans issues in a very real and authentic way that have never been raised in the same ways before, are raising school safety issues and hate crimes issues in ways that we've never dealt with before, and are forcing older people to have to confront our own ageism and our own fears about being labeled as pedophiles and child molesters because we haven't provided the kind of mentoring and support for queer youth that we should. And I think that our movement will only grow and move forward because of organizers like yourself, and I would disagree with you. It sounds like if you're at age 16 involved with a GLBT youth organization, you're as much of an organizer as I am. And that there's a lot of direction that our organizations must be taking from you, and I think many of us are, because it is the most vital and vibrant part of the work that's happening in our communities today.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Would you first please say thank you to this outstanding panel? Thank you very much. We have 4 very brief announcements. I will make the last one. Here comes 3.
Very quickly, I just wanted to describe a couple of things that are happening during our lunch break. In the courtyard, there's going to be the photo op that most of you should have heard about, the big rainbow flag, and look for Jan Park. Is Jan here? He might have stepped outside already. But you'll see a herd of activity moving towards the flag, so please join that when the time comes. And we're selling boxed lunches for $6 in the Taubman Rotunda, which is across the diagonal walkway, the sort of circular building across there. At that location, we're also going to be selling T-shirts. Please notice Bayless Kemp. He's wearing the Queer Harvard, the official Queer Harvard T-shirt. We're going to be selling those as well. So those three things and one more.
This is Dog and Pony now. We're getting very good at this. I just want to remind you that we will go back to work at 1:30, and there are 2 more panels this afternoon, and I wanted to give you a sense of those panels. The second panel is about legal activism and lobbyists dealing with legal issues, and particularly the AIDS issue as one of the other legal areas, and there will be 4 outstanding people on that panel. I know you're going to find them very exciting. And the third panel, the last panel this afternoon, will be elected and appointed officials, people who are serving as advocates and examples and role models by serving as openly gay and lesbian elected officials and appointed officials in this country. These 2 panels, I think, are going to be really additional eye-openers, and I don't want you to miss them. I know the weather is beautiful. I know it would be easy to say you came this morning and you won't be here this afternoon. Please don't do this. You will not get an opportunity to see 3 panels of this status and stature and importance for a long time again. It will be sunny tomorrow. If we don't give up a few good things to get long-term equality, we won't get there. Please come back and be with us at 1:30.